One of the more interesting individuals in the League of Legends community has been Monte Cristo, the former Korean caster, a former team owner, and just an individual who served as a personality throughout the years, constantly talking about the game, constantly giving criticisms towards Riot, towards the game, and just commentating on a number of different things, both in-game and out of it. At the end of his career with League of Legends, when he retired from casting League to move on to Overwatch casting, there was an interesting interview that he did with Blitz Esports in which the final question that he was asked was, in a sort of cathartic way to send off League of Legends, what are some of the positive things that Riot has done or that Riot is doing that he actually likes a lot, since he is someone who has been pretty critical of Riot, especially ever since Riot has perhaps unjustly removed him from owning a team. And his answer is pretty interesting. He talks about the problems that he has with Riot come from a very specific part of one department of the esports department, and not even the entire esports department, just a very individual part of the esports department that have made a number of decisions that he's disagreed very heavily with. But beyond that, Riot does a great job with, they made a fun game, firstly. They for the most part, do a great job supporting the esports scene, moving to a franchise system, doing a number of positive things for League of Legends and for esports, and it was kind of interesting to see a individual that is quite known for being a little bit more negative and critical of Riot gush about them in such a positive way. So today we're going to do the opposite of being negative. Today we are going to talk about everything that I love about League of Legends. I'm going to go through a very big list I have here, talking about all of the positive things about the game that I absolutely adore. We're going to get into game design, we're going to get into game specifics, and a bunch of things that Riot has done to make League of Legends a very fun game, to make it one of the most successful games in the world, and just talk a lot more positively about League of Legends than what we're kind of used to, getting through a big list of everything that I love about League of Legends. This is probably going to be a very long video, so I'm going to divide it up into certain subsections that there will be timestamps linked to them in the description down below. I'm going to start off talking about a number of different conceptual things with League of Legends that I really like, or things that I've experienced that have been really enjoyable when it comes to the competitive scene, when it comes to just the overall philosophy of creating the game and how the game works as a whole, without getting too specific into gameplay mechanics or anything. Then in the second section, I'm going to get more game specific and talk about a number of gameplay mechanics and just basics of the game that apply to everyone, that makes the game very, very enjoyable and a real pleasure to play. Then I'm going to move on and talk about individual roles. I'm going to go through each one of the roles and talk about what I enjoy so much about them, either when it comes to playing them myself or just the idea of them as a whole. And then finally, I'm going to get into specifics with a number of different champions and talk about a big list of champions and what it is that I enjoy so much about their existence, and a lot of positives about champion design. I've spent a lot of time complaining about certain champions like Maokai, so this is going to be the opposite and talk about just a number of different champions that I think Riot did a really, really good job with. As I said, this is probably going to be a pretty long video, so I hope you guys enjoy it. Sit back, relax, and let's talk about what it is that makes League of Legends such a damn good game. I'd be remiss if I did not begin this talking about how League of Legends is such an impactful game when it comes to the esports community and just the idea of competitive games overall. I think when it comes to competitive video games, it's kind of interesting to see the world before League of Legends and then see the world after League of Legends. There's a number of ways that people have already talked about it, talking about the incredible support that Riot has given to it, setting up the first big esports league that has been continuously successful, the LCS, and continuing to pump an insane amount of money into trying to promote esports and the growth of esports, which is very, very incredible. I mean, it's just insane to see how far esports have come, even in just the past 10 years or so. But I want to talk more so about how League of Legends really did something interesting for the world of esports that not many people have noticed, in that it created a proper team-specific sort of game that we haven't really seen the likes of before. Most of the esports that we've seen in the late 90s and early 2000s were either esports where they were 1 versus 1 games like fighting games like Melee, or most RTSs were mostly played at the competitive level, at least, as 1 versus 1 games, or the few team-oriented games that you did have, the team-oriented games like Counter-Strike or Halo, were first-person shooters. So you didn't have too much of an individual aspect. Most of the teammates that you saw all sort of performed the same sort of roles, where they might have different objectives, or they might have different jobs on the team, different things they need to be doing, but there's still, there's still first-person shooters. There's still pointing and clicking. There's still point-and-click first-person shooters, and you didn't necessarily need a entirely different set of skills to play one role on the team compared to the other. That's kind of interesting because that's not really how traditional sports are structured. Most traditional sports, or at least the most successful ones, are sports where you have team-oriented sports where everybody has massively different jobs from each other. If you look at the most successful sport in the world just in terms of popularity, it is obviously association football or soccer, where you have a number of different players on a team who have a number of different talents where they are training to do different things throughout their careers and perfect different areas of their game where they are not necessarily going to be able to easily swap between roles. But if you look at the most successful sports leagues in the world by revenue, the most successful leagues, you can see this even more so. The number one league in terms of revenue is the NFL, and then it goes to MLB and NBA. American football, baseball, and basketball are all very similar in this sort of way. American football might be the king of this, where you have a number of different players, 11 different players on each side of the ball, where each of them has a tremendously different role compared to all the others. I mean, you could stick an offensive lineman, let's say, in a hyperbolic time chamber and give him an infinite amount of time to go and train and try to become a wide receiver, and he would never be able to do it. The wide receiver's job and the running back's job and the quarterback's job and the line's job and all the different jobs that you have in the different positions are so drastically different from each other. They require such a different skill set, and there's so much strategy when it comes to just the individual lines. If you look at an offensive lineman going up against a defensive lineman and the different techniques and strategies that they use to try and overpower one another, they're insanely interesting and fun to watch on their own. And then if you think about how that's a one-on-one battle that you multiply by 11 for the 11 different players on the offense going up against the 11 different players on the defense, and every single one of them has a different job. Every one of them has a different objective. That's one of the things that makes traditional sports so exciting and so fun, when you see this level of depth and complexity where an individual, if they're a casual fan, they don't need to know all of this stuff, but for the more hardcore fan, there is a lot of strategy that you can learn and a lot of exciting things there is to, there is so much exciting stuff that you can delve into if you really want to. The world of esports didn't really have a game like that for a very long time, which isn't to say that the earlier esports out there, like Counter-Strike or Quake or whatever, that's not to say that those games weren't competitive or that they weren't deep in their gameplay and they didn't have a lot of strategy. They obviously did, but there wasn't a great game that really captivated people in the way where you're rooting for an entire team. It's like rooting for a team of misfit toys where everyone has one individual thing that's their job and they all come together to work towards a goal together. I mean, there are not a lot of individual sports out there, traditional sports, where it's just a one-player sport. I mean, you have tennis, you can maybe have golf, but there's not a lot of very popular individual sports out there that don't have a lot of team aspects, and that's something that wasn't really being given in the world of esports up until Dota and eventually League of Legends. League of Legends really broke new ground when it comes to having a number of different players that are all on a team where they all have different responsibilities, they all have different jobs, and they could not necessarily play each other's roles to perfection. I mean, you could not necessarily put Bjergsen on AD carry and he would play just as well as if he was on mid lane. Each player is highly specified at their one individual role, and they're so good at it while still simultaneously potentially being so bad at all the other roles on the team. And seeing an entire team come together and work towards a similar goal, that is something that we never really saw in the world of esports, and it's something that really broke new ground and really catapulted esports into the stratosphere that it's at nowadays. You can say all the support that Riot gave with all the money or with setting up LCS or this or that. There are a number of different things that I am sure that you could make the argument that, they affected League of Legends growth more so than any of these other pieces of growth. But if you look at the original Dota mod, and if you look at how successful that Dota was way back in the day, before it had developer support, before there were massive tournaments and everything, I mean, there was an insane amount of support and growth for this kind of competitive game way back when it was insanely hard to play the game, when you had to, already own Warcraft Warcraft 3 and then already find out on the internet ways to download the mod, and you still had millions of people playing the mod. I mean, this is something where the idea of it was there. It wasn't Riot's idea to create Dota, but Riot really perfected it in League of Legends in an insane way. And really, I mean, without Riot, I don't know if we would still have this insanely popular esport. It is ridiculous how successful esports have become, largely in part to Riot and largely in part to League of Legends, and sort of showing how you can build a successful team-oriented sport where you already have stuff like the Overwatch League now, which are trying to sort of emulate that similar sort of success. The world loves team sports, and League of Legends might be the best team esport out there. That is something that is obviously quite subjective, but at the same time, it is incredible how much the League has done for the esports scene and just how far esports have come since its release. League isn't all about esports, though. It is something that is a casual game first and foremost. It's a game that a lot of people love just playing for the sake of having some fun, for the sake of playing with friends. And there's an interesting thing that League has done that, again, it's something that a lot of us just sort of take for granted because we've played the game for so long. But League does an insanely good job of mixing the idea of going for kills and trying to get pentakills and go on killing sprees and everything, while combining that with objective play in a team-oriented atmosphere. This is something that not a lot of other games have done. If you think back to a game like Call of Duty is a great example of a game that is visceral fun. It is fun to shoot people up. It's fun. I sound like a serial killer. It's fun to shoot people in a game like Call of Duty, to go on a killing spree, to go 25-0 and get a nuke or something, to try and get your kill streaks. That is a very fun thing to do, but that's pretty much the only kind of fun you can get from Call of Duty. For the most part, Call of Duty does not offer too much more than that. It does have certain objective game modes that you can go for, search and destroy. There are team-oriented objective game modes, but that's not really what gets people playing the game. People play the game because of the visceral fun, it's like the crack cocaine of video games, where it's a very instant high that you can get from this very specific type of enjoyment from this kind of video game, that it doesn't really delve beyond that. Similarly, if you go and play a game that is a real-time strategy game, if you go and play something like the original StarCraft or StarCraft 2, you have the same sort of thing, but in the opposite way. StarCraft is an incredibly fun game when it comes to strategy, when it comes to building an army, when it comes to gathering resources and trying to efficiently gather resources, build an army, defend yourself, go on the offensive, and out-strategize your opponent to eventually destroy them and take a win. That is an insanely fun thing to do, but you don't get that same sort of visceral, immediate joy. You don't get to go on killing sprees. You don't get that instant gratification in games like first-person shooters like Call of Duty. And League of Legends is interesting because it combines both of those kinds of fun. I don't know how it did it, honestly. I don't quite know what it is that makes it so enjoyable, but in League of Legends, you get both of that. You get the enjoyment of going and solo killing a lane opponent and getting a kill on your own, getting a killing spree, maybe you get ganked and then you 2v1 and you get a double kill, and that kind of insane joy that you get from pulling off an amazing play like that is the same kind of joy that you get from going and getting a triple kill in Call of Duty or Halo. But you don't just have that. You also have the strategy of trying to move around the map, of trying to effectively split push, go for dragon, take Baron, take the towers that you can, and all the strategy that comes along with an RTS is also, it's not quite as complex, but you still have that kind of fun in League of Legends. And I think that's one of the reasons that League has really been able to blow up and become as massively successful as it has, because it's not just about one kind of fun. It has so many different kinds of fun that are all given to you in every 40-minute game that you play. It is just ridiculous how addicting that makes the game, and how it's just, you can see the numbers. League is an incredibly successful game because it's captured so many different gamers' kinds of enjoyment. One of the interesting things about League, though, is not only has it captured all of these players' hearts and minds, but it's also managed to keep them. I'm not too sure if there is a statistic on this out there, but it is insane how long people play League of Legends, even if they eventually end up quitting the game. Just from personal anecdotal experience, most of my friends, the shortest player, the players that I know that stopped playing League for the shortest period of time would be 6 months or something still. Once you start playing playing League of Legends, you are playing it for a very long time, even if you end up quitting the game. And plenty of players just never really end up quitting, even if they only play a little bit here and there, or even if they come back later. I mean, people play this game for a very long time, and it's amazing how long you can play it while never getting bored. I'm one of those individuals that just never ended up quitting. I think I've been playing for, 7 years now at this point or something, and that hasn't been 7 years of 10 games every day or 20 games every day or something. Maybe I would only play like 1 game a week when I was playing something else like Halo Reach or Persona 4. But at the same time, it is so enjoyable to play League of Legends, and it's something where you never really get bored doing so. The reason being that with the structure that League has, where you have, even if you're one-tricking a champion, let's say I want to only play Irelia for every single game that I play, I only play Irelia top lane for the next year. Even if I'm doing that, I am still getting vastly different experiences in every single game I'm playing. Maybe I play Irelia versus Gangplank one day, and then the next game I play Irelia versus Malphite, and then Irelia versus Maokai, and Irelia versus Poppy, and Irelia versus Nasus or something. And those are all vastly different experiences from one another that keeps the game feeling incredibly fresh. And then if you couple that with me playing more than just Irelia, then suddenly it feels like I can just never stop playing games, never stop having new experiences. And I mean, we're not even talking about how, if I play Irelia into Nasus one game and I go 0-5, and I play Irelia into a Nasus another game and then go 5-0, those are totally different experiences as well. I mean, if League of Legends is a game that can tickle your fancy, if you enjoy that kind of multiplayer competitive experience, then it's going to be very hard to ever stop playing the game, because the game is just so good at keeping it feeling fresh. I mean, even if Riot never released patch updates, or even if they never released new champions, or even if they just kept the game the exact same way it is today for the next 5 years, you would still be playing games, having experiences that you had never had before 5 years from now compared to today. It is just insane how refreshing this game is, and how successful it is at keeping players for such a long period of time because of that. And I mean, it's just, oh my goodness, it's so fun to continuously play. It's insane. I've never seen a game like this where you just never get bored playing it. I also think it's worth mentioning that this game is very well managed by Riot. That sounds kind of ridiculous when you think about all the controversies that have happened surrounding Riot, particularly their esports department. There have been a lot of controversies with how the Tainted Minds scandal, how they never really punished that Australian team for abusing their players, or if you talk about, the whole drama with Monte Cristo and Renegades, or if you talk about a number of different decisions they might have made when it comes to the esports side of things, or even if you just want to talk about balancing failures with stuff that I've complained about in the past, like Maokai. There are a lot of things that you can certainly criticize the different departments of Riot for, but at the same time, they have done an insanely good job with this game. If I were to think about if I could take League of Legends away from Riot and think about just giving it to any other company on Earth, I don't think that I could think of someone that would be better handled to continue supporting League of Legends as much as Riot has done. I mean, can you guys imagine, what if EA made League of Legends? It would cost $250 to play a month, and there would still be microtransactions. I mean, what if Valve had League of Legends? I mean, they have done a criminal job of not supporting Dota 2. It's been so frustrating, honestly. Like, any time that I barely look into the Dota scene, it feels like they are just not doing anything to support Dota. And beyond that, they just haven't been making any games at all. They've just been focusing on perfecting their Steam platform and not really supporting a lot of the various esports that they have. Even if you want to look at someone like Blizzard, Blizzard, I understand that they have the Overwatch League, which just started yesterday, but even then, I mean, Blizzard is not necessarily doing that well with the Overwatch League. Overwatch is still very difficult to watch. I mean, it's kind of difficult to spectate, and that's coming from someone that's played the game quite a bit. It's very difficult to just follow the game. I don't know if they've been trying to make a better spectating system, or if they just, if that's just the good old Blizzard negligence. But Blizzard has killed off, I mean, even if you just want to go back beyond that, they have killed off so many competitive games in previous years, whether you want to talk about about them just mismanaging games like World of Warcraft and the professional WoW player versus player scene, or if you want to go and look at something like StarCraft, where they just refuse to support a competitive scene. They have done a very poor job of supporting esports in the past, and they've done a very poor job of keeping their games fun and enjoyable throughout the years. I mean, when you think about all the people that have quit WoW, where WoW has the lowest subscriber numbers ever, to a point where they aren't even releasing them anymore because they're so ashamed of them. I mean, there are so many other game companies out there where they have done so many worse things than Riot, and if you were to give League of Legends to any of them, I feel like it would just end in complete disaster because of all the issues that Riot has had and of all the problems that they've had and the controversies surrounding how they've managed the esports scene or managed the balancing of League of Legends. They have still done miles better than any other company I can possibly imagine. And at the end of the day, I feel like I am just, I have to be a little bit thankful that League of Legends is something that fell into Riot's lap instead of anyone else's. And finally, there's one last thing I kind of want to talk about in this conceptual section that a lot of people kind of forget about or don't pay too much attention to, and that's the history of League of Legends as a game and as an esport is a very interesting history that is just incredibly fun to look into, to delve into, and there is a lot of fun stuff there that, I mean, you could write a book. You could write a book on the history of League of Legends and the history of its competitive scene. There are so many fun stories to delve into that I could spend the rest of this video doing nothing but reciting them off. If you're an old player, I don't know how many of you guys who are listening to me now are old school players that have played League since its early days, since season 1, since season 2, but if you remember some of the personalities like Gracchus, if any of you guys remember him, if you remember the early days of Loco Doco and Saint Vicious and Hotshot GG and Elements and Chouster and Reginald and Rain Man and Dyrus and Chaox and I could go on forever. Clever Advisor. There were V-Man. There are so many players with all these different stories from the early days of League that are so interesting and fun to delve into. I mean, if you want to talk about how there was a huge, just a monopoly or oligopoly, I guess, between TSM and CLG in the North American scene. Nobody was able to conquer anybody in the North American scene. TSM and CLG were the best teams in the world that were just trading wins over and over. It looked like there was never going to be a competitive team that could ever win a tournament other than CLG or TSM. And then suddenly, this weird nobody team named Rock Solid comes out of nowhere. They have a support player named Locust who plays support Gangplank. They have this goofy guy at AD carry that looks ridiculous named I'm a Cutie Pie. They have this guy Voyboy playing all sorts of weird stuff top lane. They have this weird jungler Jat who's like an Udyr one trick and this mid laner Skara, and they just come out of nowhere, absolutely nowhere, and start stomping every team in North America and Europe, constantly winning tournaments and beating both CLG and TSM. It was the most exciting and thrilling thing to see that happen live and was one of the most enjoyable experiences and storylines I've ever seen in any esport. And if you go back and look at the early days of League of Legends and you find so many of those different stories, so many of those different players that just completely revolutionized and changed the way that we look at the game, it is so rich. It is so enjoyable. I don't want to be rude to any other esports scene out there. I'm sure there are plenty of esports that have storylines and interesting histories, but I swear the League of Legends competitive scene in its early days was so fun and so enjoyable to be a part of, just to watch it happen live. And what's maybe even more interesting is that, you're a part of tomorrow's history every single day. Every single day there are new storylines being created in the League of Legends competitive scene that we are going to be looking back on fondly nowadays, or from 10 years from now, we're going to be looking back to these days and looking back to the first time that we had franchising in the NALCS and the first time that the Golden State Warriors and Cleveland Cavaliers got involved with Optic Gaming and Nadeshot heading up 100 Thieves and all. I mean, every single one of these stories that I talk about, if I'm talking about League's history at any point and you're thinking, oh, that sure sounds like it would be fun to be a part of, I wish I started playing League back then, don't worry, man. There are so many interesting stories that are happening every single day, and we all get to be a part of them. And oh my goodness, it's so fun. It's so fun and such an overlooked part of League of Legends. Now let's go ahead and move on and talk about some of the more specific gameplay elements of League of Legends that make the game very enjoyable to play for everyone, regardless of your role or regardless of what champion you're playing. There are certain basics of the game that these are mostly things that we just sort of take for granted or things that we just forget about because we do them every single game unthinkingly, but there's something that really make the game enjoyable to a point where, I mean, I think it's a large part of what makes League of Legends so fun and what makes it so popular when it comes to the actual gameplay. The first of which being that it is very fun to move in League of Legends. I don't know if you guys have ever really thought about this. If you have not played Dota or Warcraft 3 before, I would highly encourage you to try and play Dota 2. Try and play a single game of Dota 2 or download Warcraft 3. Play a game of Warcraft 3 or something, and just try and move around in the game a little bit and see how it feels. In those games, you have much higher turn ratios than what you have in League of Legends. So if you're moving and your character wants to move from one side to another and has to turn around, that will take like half a second to do so. And this makes the game feel very laggy. It makes the game feel very muddy almost, and it makes it feel like you can't pull off super fun plays and stuff, but it just makes it a bit of a chore to like move around the map. That's something that's kind of frustrating, and it's something that kind of makes the game unfun. If you compare that to League of Legends has almost non-existent turn ratios. If you want to talk about the wiggle that LS taught me, and I'm sure he taught other people to do, the wiggling, like moving your character back and forth so much that it prevents them from moving in one particular direction. If you were to do that in League of Legends, you have to do that incredibly fast. You have to have very high APM, whereas if you were to try and do that in Dota or something, it would be so easy that a toddler could do it. Like, the gameplay in League of Legends is incredibly quick and fast moving, which makes the game fun. It makes the game fun to do basic things. It's fun to move around. It's fun to go and auto attack minions. If you are playing Vayne or someone that has a third auto proc, it is very, very enjoyable to do something as basic as walk around and hit a minion with auto attacks, and that third auto attack on that minion with the animation and with the sound effect and with the visual effect. It is a very enjoyable experience to just do basic stuff like that. And that is something that not many other games have. In League of Legends, just moving, just autoing, just using spells. There's a few champions out there like Karthus that have intentionally bad auto attacks, but apart from them, just doing the basic mechanics of League of Legends when it comes to that kind of stuff is incredibly enjoyable, where you don't really, I don't know, I don't feel like just walking around in first-person shooters is fun in the same sort of way. I mean, there's plenty of other games that could have good movement and, maybe gameplay mechanics, like if you want to talk about Super Mario Odyssey or something, where it's probably pretty fun to pull off different jumps and to move around the map in that kind of way. But just walking your character around is not nearly as fun in other games as it is in League of Legends. And that is one area of the game that we definitely overlook because you don't really think about how fun it is to do basic things like this. These are just the building blocks of the game, but they are incredibly enjoyable. If you couple that with the gameplay is also very fast. I mean, if you want to go back and think of the Faker versus Ryu, Zed versus Zed mirror matchup and the crazy outplay that Faker did there, or if you really want to think about any example in the history of League of Legends where some pro pulled off a very impressive play, Captain Jack with a perfect cleanse, or some AD carry kiting well, the gameplay in League of Legends is incredibly quick and enjoyable because of elements of the game like we were talking about. Because you have very fast movements, and because for the most part, abilities are quick to use, you don't have too much downtime when it comes to animations. Like, you can attack, click, move. Attack, click, moving is a very enjoyable thing in League of Legends, where you auto attack and then you move away to cancel the animation of your auto attack. I mean, there are certain elements of the game like that because you have those in the game, it allows for very fast combos. It allows for very fast movements and very fast things where it's super enjoyable to pull them all off. And I'm not talking about something like Riven animation canceling. I'm talking about just, an AD carry or a top laner or someone attacking someone and then moving to continue walking forward and continue attacking where they don't get out of range of your auto attacks or your spells, so you can continuously put out damage. Just doing basic things like that are very enjoyable because the gameplay allows itself to be so quick. There are other games out there that have quick gameplay and stuff, but I don't know if any of them, I would say, are refined and clean as League League of Legends. I mean, it might be kind of difficult to compare non-top-down perspective games. Comparing a first-person shooter or third-person platformer or something to League of Legends is probably a pretty difficult thing to do. You're kind of comparing apples and oranges there, but still, it is a very enjoyable experience to do basic things like this. Like I was saying with the movement and auto attacks and casting spells and stuff, it's very enjoyable to do those basics and then to string them all together in a play where you're going for a kill, or string them all together where you're making an escape or doing something. They're all very enjoyable experiences, and it's something that, again, we just kind of take for granted because we don't really have anything to match it up against. If you were to go and try and play another game, I'm not too sure if I can think of another game that would be comparable to League of Legends other than another MOBA. But if you were to try and go play another game and just think about how quickly you're allowed to do things in the game, not many games allow you to do stuff as quickly as League of Legends. I mean, not many games allow animations to be so short, that not many games allow animations and characters to do all this stuff so fast and so quickly that you just... Oh my goodness, it's just so fun to do basic things, to pull off basic combos. And not only is it fun for the casual player to do and to learn their limits of what they can do, but when you watch a professional player that has virtually no limits in how quickly they can string stuff together, it gets very impressive very quickly. And that sort of leads me into my next point a little bit, which the gameplay in League of Legends is incredibly varied to an insane degree. Obviously, in League, you have all these different roles where depending on your role, you're going to have certain strengths and weaknesses, and the game is going to change depending on what role you're playing. That's kind of obvious, but even if you're just looking at one individual role, there are a bunch of different champion types that go into each role where the gameplay is insanely varied in that way. I mean, if you want to talk about other games, other top-down perspective games like RTS games like StarCraft or Age of Mythology, or if you want to talk about first-person shooters or something, you generally don't have as varied gameplay as you have in League of Legends. There is okay, so a good example here actually would be in Overwatch, right? In Overwatch, people were talking a lot when Overwatch first came out that there were going to be certain characters that you didn't actually have to aim. There were going to be characters like Mercy or someone where, the point and click elements of the shooter genre isn't as, important on someone like Mercy, where it doesn't really matter how you're aiming as long as you just, you're in the general vicinity and then you constantly get to heal someone. That's something that a lot of people looked at Overwatch and said it was a really big positive of the game and a really big positive of, making things a little bit more varied where you have a lot of stuff for everyone. Even for people that maybe aren't the best at first-person shooters, they could still get a little bit of enjoyment with certain characters in-game. League of Legends is like that, but turned up to 11. League of Legends, not only do you have all the different roles where you have different, maybe you can't be the mechanical god that you have to be to play AD carry or mid lane or something, but you still have support or jungler or tanks top lane where you really don't have to have too much of a mechanical, job. You can just press a few abilities and then do your job and still be very, very good and impactful and have a big impact in team fights and winning games and stuff. Not only that, but I mean, there are so many different roles in individual lanes. Top lane is the most diverse, obviously, where you have tanks that have very little mechanics, if any. You can play a tank if you're a toddler. You can play Maokai and just, even if you don't have a lot of game knowledge when it comes to being able to pull off fast combos or whatever, you don't need that to play certain characters top lane. But there are certain characters top lane where you absolutely need that. You cannot play Riven effectively if you are not very good at animation canceling and at doing all the crazy combos that you have to do, that you have to be able to do to play Riven in top lane very effectively. And that's something that's very interesting to see. Similarly, you have champions like Singed, where they completely break the confines of what you expect top lane to be like. In every lane, you're expected to use your auto attacks to CS and gain gold that way, but Singed could, in theory, get through an entire laning phase where all of the CS that he gets is from his poison. He could have like 90 or 95% of the gold that he's gotten from minions be from his poison, which all he has to do is press one ability and run around without ever having to auto attack. That's a really strange and unusual element of the game that you don't really see many other games having that much diversity. And every example that I mention here, comparing a Singed to a Riven, or comparing a Jax to a Maokai, or comparing an Irelia to a Malzahar, or comparing a Vayne top lane to a Quinn top lane even, like all of these examples are, just one example that you can you can combine them so much. Just because there are so many different champions in the game, there are so many different ways that you can play the game that are all completely different from each other. And even in AD carry, which I would say AD carry is probably the least diverse role, the most homogenous role, where every AD carry is using the same sort of form of dealing damage, right? Every AD carry is auto-attacking. That's the main source of all AD carry's damage. Even in AD carry, you still have, Ashe, where it's a very immobile champion that's much more about landing her arrow. And then you have Jhin, who has this weird 4-shot mechanic with his basic auto attacks that's completely different. And then you also have Kalista that has this weird bunny hop mechanic that changes completely how you would normally animation cancel auto attacks. And then you have, all of these different champions where maybe, some have even Corki, someone that deals a lot of damage through spells and is dealing mostly magic damage, even though he was sort of structured to be built like an AD carry. And you have all of this diversity that I could just rant about for days. I don't even know how coherent all of this is sounding, but there are so many examples of varied gameplay that you really don't see in other games. It's kind of funny to look at something like Overwatch and see a little bit of varied gameplay, which is good and fun, right? I'm not trying to criticize Overwatch here, but it's fun to see other games where they get credit for something like that when it's such a basic example compared to what you might be used to if you're someone that plays a lot of League of Legends. Another thing I think might be worth mentioning here that I have already touched on in its own video in the past, but Summoner's Rift, more specifically, I think one of the things about Summoner's Rift that people overlook is that it is a non-symmetrical map that is balanced. That is an incredibly rare thing to have in competitive games. Non-symmetrical maps that are balanced. You can maybe have a game like Halo or something where there are maps where teams are starting off on different sides and the maps are not completely symmetrical, but that's because in first-person shooters, the map that you're playing on is not necessarily the most important aspect of the game. You're still using cover, you're still just trying to aim and shoot at people, and the cover that you have is always going to be changing, the cover that people are going to be running behind and whatnot. It's always going to be changing, and even then some people would say that, some maps are more fun to play on than others, or some maps are more balanced than others. But if you're looking at most RTS games or most games that have top-down perspectives, if you're looking at competitive games more specifically in that area, you really have to have symmetrical maps most of the time. It sounds insane to have two different objectives that are at two different objectives that are important in different ways and that are taken at different times. What I'm referring to here are Baron and Dragon. Having two different objectives on two different sides of the map, that sounds insane. Or even just the idea of going down top lane. Going down top lane and playing the game on blue side is completely different to playing the game on red side, and it completely changes your strategy. It changes how far you can push. It changes what you have to ward. It changes what your, objectives are going to be and everything. And it's something that's so ridiculously insane. It's really fun, honestly. I mean, it makes the game so refreshing, and it's still astounding to me that you have this map that is not mirrored. It is not mirrored. Playing on blue side and playing on red side is completely different. Playing on top side and playing on bot side is completely different. Even if you were to swap the lanes and have, a solo lane bot lane and a solo lane top lane where you send the AD carry and support top or something, even if you were to swap like that, like we did in seasons 2 through 5 or whatever, you would still have such an insanely varied experience while it's still balanced. I mean, it's still balanced. How on earth is this still balanced? This is something that I'm not too, I'll be honest here, okay? I'm not too varied on the death of StarCraft 2. I don't really know if this was actually as big of a deal as I'm about to make it out to be, but I'm pretty sure that one of the larger problems with StarCraft 2 was the maps. One of the larger problems with StarCraft 2's competitive scene, and one of the reasons it died, was problems with the maps. And I mean, those were pretty symmetrical maps, as it were. I mean, most of the StarCraft maps are insanely just, they're just mirrored. They're just symmetrical. And that is something that it's ridiculous how Summoner's Rift is so balanced and so fun while not being symmetrical and not being nearly, it's not pretending to be symmetrical. You have all these different things. And just think about it. Think about how easy it is to get to Baron from blue side compared to red side, right? That should spell death for the balance of the map. That you can have such an easier time getting into the Baron pit from blue side compared to red side. It's insane. How is that balanced? It's ridiculous, and I love it. Oh my god, I love it. I love how insane it is that we have a non-symmetrical map in so many different ways, and it's still completely balanced. I'm never going to be able to get over that. Trying to move on though, one thing I kind of want to talk about here briefly before we get into the role specifics is the depth that you have in each individual role. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous how crazy you can get when it comes to the strategy of playing an individual role or even an individual champion. So if you want to go and look at some game like a fighting game, let's use Super Smash Bros. Melee as an example. If you want to go and look at a game like Super Smash Bros. Melee, there's obviously a bunch of different strategy that you have when it comes to playing the game, but there's little sub-communities for each character that you're going to play. If you want to play Fox effectively, you have to know how to do certain things. You have to know how to wave shine, or how to wave dash on Fox compared to wave dashing on other characters that might be harder to wave dash on, and do basic mechanics that are going to be specific to Fox. Whereas if you're playing Marth, then you have different specifics and different things you have to learn about that character so you know how to play them effectively at a competitive level. And that's one of the more fun things about video games, in my opinion, is when you have sub-communities like that, where not only does it allow you to have a little bit of an identity as being someone like, I am a Fox player, I am a Marth player or something, where you have a little bit of an identity, but there, you have a little sub-community of other Fox players or of other Marth players, where that's kind of interesting and kind of enjoyable to be a part of, where, you can discuss other strategies specific to your character that nobody else is going to be, discussing, or nobody else is going to know, because you're going to get so deep into your character and talk about so many specific elements of your character that nobody else is going to, be able to care about. Nobody else would really want to care about them, and also nobody else would really have the time and patience to go and learn so much about someone that they're not even going to play themselves. League of Legends takes this same idea and again turns it up to 11. I mean, in League of Legends, you have all these different sub-communities where not only do you have a sub-community of top laners, mid laners, junglers, AD carries, and supports, where all the strategy and everything that you should be doing and the kinds of champions you're going to be playing and the kinds of roles and jobs you're going to have in team fights and in laning phases and stuff. Not only do you have all of these different jobs that are completely specific to the 5 different roles in League, but you also have an insane number of characters that have their own sub-communities. There is a sub-community of Riven mains that just, get in circles with Illuminati, stuff, and they just talk about animation canceling and showcase animation canceling videos to each other, right? And you have these different sub-communities that just, discuss, because there is so much depth on individual champions. Some champions have more depth than others, like Riven is going to have a larger sub-community and more to talk about than a sub-community of Maokai players or something, but there's still so much. You can see there's a bunch of different mains subreddits on Reddit. There's like a Riven mains and a Yasuo mains and a Zed mains and an Irelia mains and Yorick mains and Jax mains and Ahri mains, and every different champion in game has its own community of other people that are going to discuss the strategy, discuss the builds, discuss the leveling, discuss the runes you should take, and discuss everything that you can try and do with each individual character. Think about fighting games, something like Melee. In Melee, there are maybe like 10 or something different viable characters that are considered top tier, maybe 8 top tier characters. And then in League of Legends, 139 champions, which, especially nowadays, there are a lot of them that are very viable. Even champions like Aatrox that are complete garbage, you can still win with them in ranked and in solo queue. And you're probably seeing like 50% of the champions being played at Worlds or something, depending on the Worlds patch that we have, or in the competitive scene. Like, depending on the patch you're talking about, you're probably seeing like 50 to 70% of champions being played. And, I mean, it's just so enjoyable. It's so enjoyable how deep you can get into specifics. Like, that's something that's a really enjoyable thing, is when a game has enough depth that you could spend days discussing the specifics of just one fraction of the game. And that's something that I don't know if there's another game out there that, or another game genre out there at least. I don't know if there's another genre out there that has this much depth as MOBAs do. MOBAs are just so complex despite being so simple. They're easy to pick up. It's easy to pick up and just play one character, but there is still so much depth, so much to learn, and it is just so enjoyable. Now is the point in the video where I want to get a little bit more specific, talking about the roles in League of Legends and things that I enjoy about each one of them. Obviously, here I'm mostly a solo laner, so I'm going to know a little bit more. I'm going to know a lot more about top lane than the other roles, and maybe a little more about mid lane than the other roles. But just from my perspective, as someone that has occasionally played other roles, as well as someone that, you know, I have experiences with all of the roles in League of Legends every game that I play. There's one of each of these on each team. So I want to talk about all of these and all the things that I love about them, obviously starting off with top lane. When I first started playing League of Legends, I found out about the game through watching the World Cyber Games and through watching CLG beat SK Gaming in the World Cyber Games 2010 finals, which was a very enjoyable experience to watch, but it sort of got me watching Hotshot GG's stream. And Hotshot GG's stream way back in the day was very enjoyable to watch. He was like the only League of Legends streamer at the time, I believe, way back when people still streamed on own3d.tv. But the interesting thing about Hotshot was that, you know, you got to see top lane. And top lane, especially back in Season 1 and Season 2, was incredibly varied. Nowadays, we still have a super varied top lane, but top lane is a little bit more varied from patch to patch. Like one patch, you might have fighters being more viable than tanks. The next patch, you have tanks being more viable. The next patch, you have juggernauts being more viable. And when you have a patch where, you know, everybody is playing the same archetype of champions, you know, everyone's playing tanks top lane, that can be a little bit boring, maybe, where you're seeing the same 5 or 10 champions being played top. But way back then, you would see a new champion every single game. The really interesting thing for me about top lane is not only do you have the largest pool of champions of any individual role in League, somewhere up around 50 different champions, depending on how you categorize them, you not only have this large pool of champions, but you have the most diverse pool of champions that you can see in an individual role. If you look at something like AD Carry, there are some diverse different kinds of AD Carries out there, but everyone is a ranged AD Carry. Everyone in the AD Carry role is a ranged character that is doing damage with physical auto attacks, and that's their primary source of damage. There isn't too much that can be changed beyond that. You occasionally see something like Riot try and throw Mordekaiser bot or Ziggs bot or something, but I mean, that's just a gimmick that's going to last for a patch or two. This is the core, you know, those are going to be the core champions you see on AD Carry. Top lane, though, that's not the case at all. You see every kind of champion possible being played in that lane viably. You might have straight mages like Kennen or Vladimir. You might have weird mage bruisers like Rumble. You might have some champions that are like AD carries, but they're better in solo lane. So someone like Quinn or Vayne top lane that can both be played as AD carry, but they also have this weird little strategy that can work with them top lane. You not only have that, but you also have certain assassins or weird kind of champions, like I don't know what you would categorize Pantheon as, but you know, Pantheon is best played top lane. You occasionally see Talon's top lane. You see all sorts of weird champions that don't have any categorization at all, like Heimerdinger top lane. You have Kayle top lane. And these are just the weird picks out there. This isn't even talking about the main core champions that you're going to see top, the fighters, the bruisers, the juggernauts, and the tanks. These are all such interesting and diverse classes that because you have such a wide range of champions and a wide range of play styles, that really makes the lane feel fresh. So you're constantly going and getting a new experience every single time you play a game top lane, even if you're one-tricking a champion, just because you're playing against all these different kinds of characters out there. And that's what I first saw when I was watching Hotshot GG's stream. You know, back in the day there, I was watching a Nidalee 1 trick, or a Nidalee Cho'Gath Galio 3 trick, I guess. But, you know, I was watching a guy that mained a champion, and that, you know, he was going up against completely different people every single game. It was kind of like I was watching Dragon Ball Z or something, or like some show where there's a main character that's constantly going around and, you know, defeating all these different kinds of enemies that all have their own different strategies. That's pretty much every anime or something, right? But, you know, that's kind of what it felt like going top lane in League of Legends, where even if you were a one trick, even if you were just playing one individual champion, you were going up against so many different things. I mean, that's what's really kept the lane fresh and fun for me, even throughout all the bad metas, even throughout all the frustrating metas, and even 7 years later after constantly maining the lane. Top lane is not the only fun lane, though. All the lanes are great, all the different roles are great, I should say, because the next one we're going to talk about is jungle. When I look back on the history of League of Legends, I feel like most of the personalities and the individuals that I really looked up to and found entertaining and interesting were all jungle mains. I don't know if this is just coincidence, but, you know, even the entertainment YouTubers like Sky Williams were junglers. I mean, a lot of people out there were just so incredibly interesting and entertaining, and they all happen to be junglers, like Saint Vicious or even someone like I Will Dominate, right? But anyway, the interesting thing that I think is really fun about jungle when it comes to the actual gameplay of playing as a jungler in League of Legends is that obviously it's a unique role in that it doesn't have a lane. You're kind of PvEing instead of PvPing for the first 10 minutes of the match. But the interesting thing about jungle in particular is how much pressure you can have and how much effect you can have on a game without actually doing much. There was this interesting post that I saw on Reddit a long time ago about a jungler who made it up to Master Tier while having horrible mechanics. The guy talked about how he was just an awful player mechanically speaking because, you know, he was like an Udyr one trick or something, and he just, you know, he could not click his fingers fast enough to be a Zed main mid lane or a Riven main top lane or something, and all he really had was game knowledge. But he had a lot of game knowledge. He was able to consistently, you know, take Dragon anytime he saw a jungler top, take Rift Herald anytime he saw the enemy jungle bot. He was able to constantly counter gank and show up and be where he needed to be, and he was able to climb all the way to Master Tier with that. And that's something that I think is very interesting about jungle, is that you can have such a huge impact on the game without being necessarily the most mechanically intense player in the world. I mean, if you want to talk about Saint Vicious, like I mentioned, he was famous for being the oldest player in the League of Legends scene. You know, he's like 60 years old or something, and he was playing League of Legends competitively, and you can't really do that at his age unless you're playing a role that isn't maybe necessarily the most mechanically intense thing. There are mechanically intense things about being a jungler, obviously, but the fact that you can have such a huge impact on a game just with map awareness and being able to pressure the different areas of the map at the right moment, I mean, that's something that's very interesting, and I think is one of the most interesting things about the role that is probably very enjoyable for people that main jungle. I've often wished I had the courage to just quit playing top lane and play jungle, because honestly it also feels like the easiest role to carry with, just because you can have an effect on everywhere in game. Maybe I should get around to doing that someday. Following jungle, we have mid lane, which is where things start getting a little bit interesting. With mid lane, this might be a little bit of a flaw in how I look at League of Legends, but I kind of group mid lane, jungle, and top lane all together. They're all roles where you sort of have similar kinds of scaling and similar kinds of variety in the different kinds of champions you're going to see. With AD carry and support, which we're going to talk about in a moment, you know, AD carries are all the same archetype, and supports are all pretty, you know, relegated to bot lane. But with all the other champions in the game, you can see them, you know, shift around a little bit. There are some top laners that can jungle and some junglers that can go top lane, some champions that can be played top or mid, and they all have various scaling. Like a lot of the champions, you know, maybe they're better off in the late game, and a lot of mid laners in particular might want to wait and scale, and you know, someone like Azir is probably going to be better at the 20 or 30 minute mark than he is at the 5 minute mark. But at the same time, there are some champions out there that are better suited for the early game. And, you know, Elise in jungle can have a bigger effect in the early game and the games that finish earlier compared to games that go on later. And same deal with other champions, mid lane and top lane. You know, Pantheon compared to Maokai top lane, or mid lane, you know, an early game assassin, Talon, responsible for 25% of first bloods compared to someone like Azir. Anyway, though, the interesting thing about mid lane that differs itself from those other roles is that it's a little bit like the superstar role. It's the role where you have the Fakers or the Bjergsens or the big important character that's the big superstar of your team playing that role, because it's a very important role to play. If you are playing mid lane, not only do you have to be very good yourself, because most mid laners are very, very good and they have to play against each other when laning mid lane, so they have to be incredibly good, and them already being very good means they just have to keep on getting better and being the in a sort of snowbally effect, if you can see what I'm saying here. Not only do mid laners have to be very good, but, you know, their mistakes are punished more. If you have a mid laner that makes a mistake and loses lane, it's going to be infinitely more hard to come back in that game compared to if you have a top laner that loses lane top lane. And, you know, top lane, sometimes top lane, you might lose your lane and still win the game by getting carried with your team, or you might win your lane and not get to win the game, still lose the match because your team was really bad. You don't get to have as much of an effect top lane, but Mid lane is a very important role. You have to have a very large effect mid lane because, mid lane, you can control the entire map. You can roam to every lane. You can steal the enemy jungle. You can go kill the enemy jungler. You can affect any lane that's losing, sort of like jungle, but the lane version of that. I guess a pretty apt comparison would be comparing mid lane to being a quarterback in the NFL. In the NFL, there's a bunch of different roles, right? In the NFL, there are a bunch of different jobs where a team comes together and everyone has their individual job, and they're all important. You need to have good players on every side of the ball. But at the same time, the quarterback is a little bit more important. The quarterback is a little bit more of the superstar guy that is going to carry his team to wins if he's very good, and that it's going to be kind of difficult to carry him if he's really bad. If you have a team where, if you have an Andy Dalton at quarterback, it's going to be kind of difficult to carry him to wins, and you're probably going to be a pretty mediocre team. You need to have a Tom Brady, or you need to have an Aaron Rodgers, or you need to have a Blake Bortles, and if you don't, it's going to be harder to win games. But if you have one of those guys, if you have one of those superstars that's very good at playing quarterback, then you can consistently make it to the playoffs. You can consistently win playoff games, make it to the postseason, and go try and win Super Bowls, where if you don't have one of them, then it's going to be a little bit more difficult. And that's the sort of thing that I think is kind of interesting to see in League of Legends as well. Seeing that kind of superstardom, and even though, you don't necessarily win games automatically if you have a good mid laner, and you can still lose games, or you can still win games if you have a bad mid laner. But it's interesting to have a role that has a little bit more influence like that because, again, it breaks up the symmetry. It gives a little bit more characterization. And overall, I think it's a very positive and healthy thing for the game. So I'm excited. I'm always excited to see, whatever star mid laner play at Worlds. Next up, we have AD Carry, which is where things get even more interesting, in my opinion. AD Carry is a little bit unusual in that it is a role where you are kind of horrible in the early game and kind of godly in the late game. We just talked about how I kind of group mid lane, top lane, and jungle together because they're all roles where you can maybe have someone that's an early game champion or a late game champion. But on AD Carry, everybody is a late game champion. You might have some champions that are better at winning lane early on, and you might have some champions that are better at extending matches beyond 50 minutes. But at the same time, almost every AD carry wants to farm up. Almost every AD carry wants to get an Infinity Edge or a Rune-Ins or a Blade of the Ruin King or some crazy late game item because they're late game scaling champions. An AD carry at the 20-minute mark is going to be a lot more effective and useful than an AD carry at the 5-minute mark. And the reason I say that's interesting is because I don't know if this is something you see in any other esport, right? If you go and look at something like Overwatch, in Overwatch, regardless of if you're playing a supportive role or a DPS role or a tank role, every character is useful at every moment of the game. And again, in League of Legends, pretty much every other role, you have very important and useful characters at every moment of the game. It's only AD carry that is intentionally really, really weak in the early game and then just godly in the late game. If you get a game where you have a Vayne on your team at the 40-minute mark, she can 1v5, get pentakills, go and just instantly win the game for your team. And that's something that's really interesting. I don't know if you see that in any other esport. There may be other esports out there where something like that exists, and I'm just not mentioning it. It's something that's escaping my mind right now, but that is a really interesting and fun thing to see because, I mean, again, it provides more variety, and not only do you get to see this variety where that's another option for if you're a new player that wants to, pick up a new role or something, but it's also really exciting to see those late game scalers. If you see a double lift on Vayne, or if you see a Captain Jack with his perfect cleanses, or some crazy mechanical AD carry in a late game, it is an incredibly thrilling and exciting thing to see, and I absolutely love watching it every opportunity I get. Lastly, we have support, which I'm going to end on by saying I think support in League of Legends might be one of the best supports that I've seen in any video game, if that makes sense. Support is an idea, having supporting characters. That's an idea that we've had ever since MMOs, or maybe even before that, probably since tabletop games or something. Supports have always been around through video games for a very long time. But I think the interesting thing about supports is, I'm going to talk about this a little bit when we get into the champions specific stuff, but supports can have such a huge impact on a game that you wouldn't normally see, right? Like normally if you go and you're, I don't know, another game with supports, but if you go into another game and another esport or something, maybe like WoW, PvP, or whatever, like most of the time when you have a support character, supports are just relegated to healing. Supports are just relegated to, you know, healing and maybe giving some debuffs or something, and not really having that big of an impact. A support player cannot single-handedly carry or win a game or do something like that. They are pretty reliant on supporting good players. That is still something that exists in League of Legends. I don't mean to suggest that it doesn't, but it's something that exists to a much lesser degree. There are supports in-game where if you play well enough on that support, you can win the game. I mean, you can carry a horrible AD carry. You can carry a team just through immaculate support play. And support probably is the role still where, you know, you are going to see games where a support player maybe plays their mind out and still loses just because they can't carry the garbage they have on their team. But at the same time, that's going to be less so than every other game I've ever seen a support class in. I've never seen a support class in any other game that gets to have as much of an impact in multiple different ways as you do in League of Legends. Not only do you have heal buses like Soraka out there, but you also get to have champions that have pretty intense disables. I would say someone like Janna has a pretty insane amount of disables that can really change a game. If she interrupts a Katarina ultimate or some channeled ultimate or something, or you know, she can save a team in an insane way. Not only do you have the Jannas, though, you have the Sorakas, you have the Jannas, you have the Alistars, you have the Blitzcranks, you have the Threshes, you have engaged supports, you have disengaged supports, you have passive supports, you have aggressive supports. You have so many different supports in League of Legends, and the thing that I absolutely love about the class in this game is that you have so many opportunities to have a huge impact on a game, more so than I've ever seen with any other support class out there. That is something that I think, you know, maybe I'm wrong on this just because I don't play too much support myself, but I mean, maybe that's something to mention, that when I play support, when I get autofilled onto support, I always lose, right? I always lose when I get autofilled onto support. You know why? Because I don't know the role, because I'm bad at the role, and because support is an important enough role that you can still throw games by being a bad support. You can still throw games and automatically lose, because it is a role that still takes skill, that still takes a lot of skill and a lot of knowledge, and it's also a role that is important enough that it can decide games if you have a good or bad support. And I think that's really interesting, and I'm really glad that support is the way that it is in League of Legends. When I look at all the roles that you have in League of Legends, maybe the thing that's most interesting to them about me is that you have all of these different roles that come together in a beautiful way, where again, you know, maybe I'm starting to gush a little bit too much about League of Legends, but I can't think of other examples outside of traditional sports where you have such a variety, such a great variety, such diversity, I guess is the word I'm looking for. You have so much diversity in the different kinds of champions that you're going to see, in the different kinds of team compositions you're going to play with, in the different kinds of roles and objectives that you might want to take. And that's the thing that makes League of Legends so interesting. It's kind of funny if you go and think about, I mean, some of those old joke threads that, you know, would stereotype players that are junglers, or players that are AD carries, or players that are mid laners, you know, stereotype top laners as being shy individuals because they just want to go up to their top lane and then just stay on their little island. Or if you want to stereotype mid laners to being hot shots, or junglers to being really ragey, or supports to just constantly getting abused or whatever. I mean, that's the kind of interesting thing about League, is that you have all of these different roles that almost have personality with how different they are from each other, and then having all of those different roles come together in a way that you don't really see in other games out there. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing, and I'm always gonna love it. I love the setup that we have in League of Legends. I can't imagine a League of Legends that has 6 roles, 6v6 like it was originally planned on being. I can't imagine League of Legends being a 6v6 game. How could you possibly add a role to this already perfect cast of characters? Or how could you take one away? How could you make it 4v4? I mean, it's just a great thing. It's like one big happy family, if I'm going to be cheesy. Finally, though, we are at our fourth subject, champion-specific things I love about League of Legends. I have a list of champions here in no particular order. This is not alphabetical or anything, if you could not tell. And I know I already did this in my big video that was talking about every single champion in League of Legends, but I want to go a little bit more in depth and talk about a number of champions that I really like their design, that I think is really interesting or really great. And yeah, we have a few champions to talk about here, so let's go ahead and jump right in. Firstly, I have to talk about Irelia because it's me, so let's talk about Irelia. Irelia is my favorite champion in League of Legends to play, obviously. I still don't entirely know what it is about her that makes her so viscerally fun. She's so enjoyable. I've heard that her rework from Irelia Carries You, he says that her rework is going to be incredibly fun. I cannot wait for it. The fact that her Q is one of the more interesting abilities that you've seen in League of Legends. And one of the things that impresses me most about Irelia is that she's such an old champion. She is a champion that has been around for an incredibly long time. I mean, way back in the day. I mean, way back, Chaos was once an Irelia one-trick. I don't even know if you guys know who he is at this point. It's been so many years. But if you knew who Chaos was the AD carry on TSM for a while before they got Wild Turtle. And he was an Irelia one-trick. He was famous for being an Irelia one-trick before he eventually moved to AD carry. I mean, that's how old Irelia is as a champion. And the fact that she has remained consistently interesting, needing very few balance changes. Even now, there are people like myself that don't necessarily know if she needs a rework, or at least needs one as much as other champions do. She is someone that has been around for such a long time and still remains a viable pick, a fun pick, a pick that plenty of people love. She is so enjoyable. Her Q is a great ability. A lot of her ideas, maybe they are a little bit frustrating to play against. Stuff like her E might not be the most fun thing in the world, but I mean, her Q alone, it was such a brilliant thing. Give the Nobel Prize to whoever came up with Irelia's Q. Moving on, we have to talk a little bit about Jax, because as I said in a previous video, Jax might actually be my favorite fighter conceptually. Jax is such an interesting champion in that I love the idea of kind of teaching people to wait until your opponent makes mistakes, and having a champion that's pretty centered around that is pretty awesome. Jax is a champion that definitely can be aggressive. Don't get me wrong, he can be the aggressor and go, especially back in earlier seasons before he became garbage, he could be very aggressive and go get kills, get first bloods, push leads, and press leads. But the idea of Jax being someone that's, nowadays at least, is a little bit more, sit back, wait for your opponent to make a mistake and make a bad engage, and then you counter strike, then you go in, then you get a kill, and then snowball and split push. And he is definitely a very enjoyable champion. I like that idea, that Counter-Strike mentality and Counter-Strike idea, and I definitely enjoy his gameplay. He is very enjoyable. I mean, he might be one of the more enjoyable champions when it comes to just spamming buttons. I remember way back in the day when I was playing with Athene, when I went over to Belgium to play with Athene for a while, I remember watching him play Ryze. He would just kind of cup his hand, make his hand into a little bit of a cup, if you know what I mean, and just spam it on all four of his abilities, the QWER abilities, except he was left-handed, so he would be using his right hand to use abilities and use like the number pad. But his four abilities, he would just kind of cup his hand and then smash all four of his abilities at once, which I thought was kind of funny to look at. No offense to you, Athene, but that was something that was kind of interesting and kind of funny, and that's something that some champions can get away with doing. But at the same time, I don't think that's something you can necessarily do with Jax, but it's something that's still fun, to be able to constantly get your W's off, trying to animation cancel with your W, and then have your Q come up, and then leap strike and auto attack, and then leap auto W, and then throw up your counter strike right as they turn in, and you get to spam a lot of buttons and animation cancel stuff, and constantly throw out time mats and whatnot. There are probably other champions like that, but Jax is definitely he is definitely my favorite champion when it comes to just having that pure enjoyment when it comes to using your abilities, having fun animations, and going off on killing sprees, chasing people down. And yeah, he's just a fun champion overall. Next up, I want to talk about Singed for a little bit, because Singed is a champion that I mentioned at the start of my last video as being one of the better designed champions, despite being how old he is. For those of you who don't know, Singed was the very first champion created in League of Legends. He was not a part of the original 40 released, but a writer said a long time ago that there were 6 champions that were first created. Singed was one of them. Lee Sin was one of them, interestingly enough. He didn't get released until years later. But Singed was the very first champion to ever have a model created. And he is very, very interesting in that he is just so completely different. Like, you would think if you're creating a champion, you would think that people would think, oh, you know, let's make Ashe, let's make a ranged character that auto attacks, let's make a Pantheon, let's make a melee character that auto attacks, let's make a mage character that auto attacks but also uses spells. You would not think that the very first champion in all of League of Legends has no need to auto attack, that they get to just run around and set up this poison. And that poison mechanic is maybe one of the most original ideas that for some, I mean, it's still balanced. How is it still balanced? How is Singed seeing more play in competitive play than some of the more recent champions we've seen? I mean, Singed is so interesting in that he has been not only good and not only fun, but viable in competitive play as well. He is he's just geniusly designed. I swear. I think the guy that created Singed is, he's created a lot of champions. I think the guy that created Singed is actually named Ezreal, Riot Ezreal, and he's created a lot of very, very good champions. Singed, though, Singed is a masterpiece. Singed is very, very well done as a champion. I could gush about him for a very long time. Next up, we have Ahri, which I know a bunch of people are gonna be like, oh, Ahri, she's the waifu or whatever. That's, you know, I'm not talking about that. The interesting thing about Ahri was actually a champion that I mained a while ago. When Ahri first came out, I was a mid laner. I've kind of been between mid and top lane way back in the early days of League, at least. I didn't necessarily only play top lane. I kind of played mid and top lane at the same time before we had the role selection and champion select. So I would prefer mid or top lane, and Ahri was my one-trick mid lane for a while back in Season 1. The thing that I like so much about Ahri is that she has a perfect amount of like skill and still being rewarded when you pull off that skill. It's not something that's necessarily as obvious as someone like Xerath, where Xerath has a lot of skill shots. Every one of his abilities is a skill shot. So if you land them all, you're obviously very skillful. If you miss them all, you're obviously not very skillful. Like, you can just give someone all skill shots and then make it kind of obvious like that. But the thing that I always liked about Ahri was that she was a very good champion if you could land her charm, land her Q, and she was still someone that was handicapped a little bit. She doesn't really have the best wave clear early on until her Q can take away ranged minions. She doesn't really have the best, you know, she still takes a lot of, you have to land a lot of abilities, especially nowadays, if you want to get a kill on her solo killing a lane opponent, and she can be kind of difficult to pull off going in and carrying games, depending on the meta, depending on if she's really popular as a pick or whatever. But I swear, she is, you know, maybe it has something to do with she was the first mid laner that I ever mained, but I really think she is maybe the perfect balance of a champion that is very, very difficult, or maybe not the most difficult thing in the world, but she's someone that's super skill oriented, where you gotta play very well if you want to land everything perfectly, but if you do land everything perfectly, then you're going to be rewarded heavily for your very good play. And that's one thing I love about her, and she'll always have a special place in my heart, just because she was that first mid laner that really kind of did that kind of play style for me. Next up, we have Riven, and I gotta mention Riven here. As much as I hate her, oh my god, I kind of hate Riven, but I hate the people that play Riven. No offense to Exile. I hate the people that play Riven. I don't really hate Riven herself. Riven is a really interesting champion, because she's a champion that we have, you know, it's like you have your own mini game. It's like pulling off Riven animation cancels or something is like, I don't know. It's like pulling off combos in Street Fighter, where you got to dedicate some time to learn how to animation cancel and combo all of her abilities together. And it's like its own mini game, just trying to figure out everything you can possibly do with Riven, much less perfect it. You have so much time that you can spend in custom games just trying to figure all of that out. And it's a really interesting thing that I think is maybe one of the more enjoyable things to see in League of Legends, when you have certain champions, like I was talking about earlier, when you have certain champions where you can go and just spend years, non-stop years, playing this one individual character, and, you know, not even playing them in solo queue. You can play a lot of time with them in custom games and always still have more to learn. That's something that I just think is so interesting, is having this much depth for a character. Other games have that. I forget the guy that has like a million abilities in Dota. You know, there are other games that have that, but I gotta give props to Riven. As much as I hate the people that play her, I gotta give props to Riven for being that for League of Legends, because she really does open up a very interesting door with that kind of idea, and she's pretty balanced for what it's worth too. Continuing with this idea, I kind of want to give a bit of a shout out to Draven, because Draven is very similar. Draven is like the Riven of AD carries, where he has his own little mini game with his axes that I have no idea how Draven players do it. Draven is so hard to play because you want to catch like every single one of his axes, but sometimes you can't do that. You got to let one of the axes go, because otherwise you're not going to be in range to auto attack someone. Like, that's something that I think is really interesting about Draven. You know, it's again, some people might call it a gimmick, but I like gimmicky mini games. You know, with something like League of Legends, that's what the game is all about. Creating a bunch of different champions that all have their own personality, and Draven definitely has a lot of personality. Going back up to top lane, I want to take a little bit of time to mention Garen, who I made a video on recently, where, again, kind of rolling along with this idea of having a bunch of different characters where they have their own little mini game, their own little quirks, their own little things that are unique to them. I think there should be a champion in League of Legends, or a different number of champions that are just easy. You know, champions that, you know, maybe they are never going to be played in competitive play, but they should exist in the game. They should serve as a stepping stone to get you to higher places, and I think that's exactly what Garen is. I don't know if I could ever one-trick Garen just because of how simple he is, but I could definitely spend a lot of time playing him, because he's someone that will teach you so much about yourself, as I highlighted in that previous video. He is someone that's going to teach you a lot about yourself, and I think it's very important and very exciting to have that kind of learning tool in the game. I don't know if Riot originally intended for him to be a learning tool when they put him in the game, but I am pretty happy and excited to see that he is a very interesting and fun learning tool, and that he exists, that he can be that stepping stone and that bridge to get you where you want to go. Moving on from Garen, I now want to talk about impactful supports or engaged supports, people like Alistar, Leona, and maybe Thresh. I think all of these guys, all of these supports that are super aggressive, that get to go and serve as engagers and serve as tanks, are really interesting, because that's not something that we really see in any other kind of game that has supports in it. I was gushing about supports a second ago, obviously, when I was talking about the role-specific stuff, but the thing about supports like Alistar or like Thresh or even Blitzcrank or whatever is I don't know if you really have those kind of tanky, engaged supports in other games. Maybe I'm forgetting. I don't know, like, is there a WoW spec for, you know, for healers or something that makes them super tanky? Or I don't know, like that idea of having the support also serve as an engager and also serve as a tank and also serve as this person that can go incredibly aggressive and have these great long stuns and knockups and knockbacks and pulls and everything. I mean, that sounds like the kind of stuff that you give to a tank normally, and the tank is not generally seen as the support character. It's really interesting and really exciting to see these kinds of supports continually being released into League of Legends. League of Legends could be so boring bot lane if every single support we had was a Soraka or a Sona or a Janna or whoever, but seeing these kinds of impactful supports and engaged supports, it just makes the game feel so fresh. And it also, something that you should, or something that I should mention here, is that impactful supports like this also make the entire rest of the game fresh, because if you have an impactful support on AD carry, or with your AD carry bot lane, if you have an impactful or engaged support being played bot lane, then that means you don't have to run a tank top lane. You don't have to run a tank in the jungle. You can run a Leona bot lane and then run a Kali top, or you can run an Alistar bot lane and run Elise in jungle. And having that kind of option, even if players don't always take it, is really, really exciting and refreshing, and I am very grateful for these kinds of supports being in game. Moving on from them, though, let's go ahead and talk about a champion that, like Riven, I hate the people who play him, but I gotta give props to the champion itself, Yasuo. Yasuo is a very interesting champion in that he is like the Riven of mid lane. I kind of sound like game critics where they say that this is the Dark Souls of first-person shooters, or this is the Dark Souls of platforming or whatever. I'm kind of just saying that everyone is like the Riven or whatever, but, you know, Yasuo really is is that same kind of idea. The thing about Yasuo that makes him so interesting and different from Riven, though, is that while he does have that same sort of like high mechanical skill cap area, he's also interesting in that he's feast or famine. There was once a time where, I forget who it was that said this, but there was a Yasuo player that said, you know, it's not actually true that all Yasuos either go 1-10 or 10-1. Yasuo players go 5-5 just as often as every other champion does, and that's not actually true. I disagree with that entirely. The thing about Yasuo is that he actually does always go 1-10 or 10-1. I've never seen another champion like this where they are completely a glass cannon. He is not someone that is ever going to be tanky unless there is some stupid item change that breaks him. But, you know, he's never going to be a tanky champion. If he's a tanky champion, then he's busted. He is a champion that is designed to always go 1-10 or 10-1, to just be a hyper carry where you are insanely rewarded, more so than any other champion, if you are very good at them, and you are punished more so than any other champion if you are very bad at them. And that's one thing that I think is really, really fun about Yasuo. And again, maybe it would kind of blow if every single champion was like this, and it would probably break a league. But just having one character out there, having that option for those people that are interested in it, that again brings the game a little bit of freshness, and I think he's very well designed. Next up, we have a few interesting champions. We have Xerath, firstly, that, again, I was talking about this a little bit with Ahri, but I do still like that Xerath exists. I think the idea of having a champion that is pretty much just all skill shots is something that's good to have. I think it's really, you know, it might be obvious if someone's very good at them, or if someone's very bad at them, or if someone's in the middle. That might make it pretty obvious when you look at someone like Xerath, because he is entirely skill shots, and so there isn't too much wiggle room when it comes to showing off if you're good or bad. He doesn't have the most creative abilities because of that, but I do like the idea of having someone that's an artillery kind of mage, where they are just skill shots, because again, I think the brilliance of League of Legends is having like one of each of these ideas all thrown into the same game, and then you get to see the creativity of when they're interacting with each other. And that's part of what makes Xerath interesting, is not only that he's a champion that's all skill shots, but he's a champion that's all skill shots and then has to go up against Yasuo, or then has to go up against Ahri, or some mage, or someone that might be, you know, have a lot of movement, and he not only has to land his skill shots, but he has to predict their movement abilities and try and predict and make sure that he lands his skill shots before they use an escape or this or that. And I think that's one of the things that makes Xerath really interesting and gives him some serious depth, is that not only is he a skill shot champion that just spams skill shots, but he's someone that has to also account for every movement ability in the game because of that. And I think that's really interesting, and again, just a fun option to have. Now I want to take a little bit of time to talk about Shen, because Shen is a champion that I kind of hint at complaining about a little bit here and there, but I really enjoy him, and I enjoy the idea of him being in game. The thing about Shen is that he's one of those champions that, because he has a global ultimate that's an ultimate he cannot use on himself or in lane, he is always either going to be a champion that wins lane or loses lane very hard. The reason being, he's a champion that only has 3 abilities he can use in lane. He cannot use his ultimate, so he's either going to be able to win his lane with only 3 abilities, or he's going to lose his lane because he only has 3 abilities, and that can make him kind of black and white when it comes to laning against him and whether he's strong or whether he's weak. But at the same time, he's still someone that I really like the idea of, and that I'm glad is in the game. Riot gave him a very interesting rework where he actually balances out pretty well with a pretty particular playstyle. He can still win lane while still being balanced with only his 3 abilities. His Q in particular, if he, you know, goes in and uses his 3 Qs and then manages to get out without taking much damage, that's really how you play Shen well and end up winning a lane with him. And seeing this champion that, for the most part, he is pretty balanced in lane, but having that global presence. Seeing champions that have that kind of global presence, this goes for pretty much all champions with globals, like Twisted Fate or whoever, but I love the idea of having someone that, you know, teleports across the map and gives a shield. And having that, as long as it's balanced, that's a really cool idea. Having a supportive tank that can teleport across the map and give a shield and then save a teammate and show up and maybe turn a fight or something, that is something that's a really cool idea. And again, like most of the champions on this list, makes me glad that he's in the game. Rammus is next, and I want to mention here Rammus because I just love the idea of Rammus. He's another champion that, again, he might actually be maybe a little bit underpowered now. I don't know how he works in the meta. He kind of seems like one of the older champions that's sort of fits into my last video where, you know, they're kind of always overpowered or always underpowered, where anytime I see Rammus in a game, it kind of feels like he's overly oppressive with how you know, how impossible it feels like it is to kill him. But I love the idea of him. I love the idea of being able to, you know, suddenly turn into a ball and roll across the map. That's something that, you know, the idea of transforming your character and then being able to move them in unusual and unique ways, that's something that's very cool and is a very enjoyable thing to do. I mean, that's just like childlike fun, right? That is something that is very enjoyable and fun to do. And I don't even know if I have to say anything beyond that. I mean, Rammus is just he's a fun character. He's a very fun idea. He is a very enjoyable, unusual idea. I wish there would, you know, he's kind of like an armadillo or whatever. I wish there were more animal champions in League of Legends. I wish we had a bee champion. If we had a bee champion, like a big bumblebee that flew around, that would be awesome. I wish we saw more champions that were a little bit more unusual, less humanoid, and a little bit more like Rammus. Next up, I want to mention Nasus here, but I might also want to throw Veigar into this category. One thing that I really enjoy about the way that both of their kits work with their stacking mechanic is how balanced it is. Similarly with how I was kind of going on about how cool it is that Summoner's Rift is asymmetrical and still a balanced map to play on for both sides. Nasus and Veigar, any champion that has that sort of stacking mechanic is very interesting to me, because that seems like the sort of thing that would possibly get overpowered and could possibly cost you. That's something that just kind of seems broken. That seems like a kind of idea that, you know, anytime people are talking about, anytime friends get around together and, you know, they want to talk about, oh, who's going to be in the next Super Smash Brothers or something. Like, whenever individuals are talking about video games like that, they love throwing out ideas that sound maybe cool, but they sound like they would also break the game. This kind of sounds like one of those ideas that would be cool, but could just break the game. Being able to stack damage infinitely is a very strong mechanic, and I don't really know enough about Nasus or Veigar to tell you how they're balanced out, but the fact that they're both balanced champions is very, very fun, very cool, and very interesting. It might just be they have so many other weaknesses in their kit, but I mean, they're still strong enough to be viable, and again, they're just, that's something that's really impressive to me, that Riot is able to hit that nail on its head, because I'm sure that is an incredibly tough balancing act to be able to give a champion infinitely scaling damage and still make them viable, still make them balanced, not have them be too overpowered, but still having them be viable enough that they're powered enough to be playable. I mean, that's something that is very impressive, and I still don't know how Riot managed to do that. I want to talk here a little bit about Kayne, and a few of the newer champions that Riot has made recently. I don't really like Zoe too much. I think Zoe has the same problems as old Nidalee, so there are some of the recent releases that Riot has done that I am not too fond of, but I do think that Kayne and a few of the other recent releases Riot has done have been very well done. I mean, Kayne in particular I want to mention because Riot has always kind of had the idea of transformation. Riot has always had the idea with champions like Jace, with champions like Nidalee, the idea of, you know, having maybe 2 forms and multiplying your abilities into potentially 8 abilities or 7 abilities or something. Like that's something that Riot has played around with a lot in the past, and I love the fact that they were able to play around with it in a new way. I don't know when the last time we got it might have been Jace actually. I don't know when the last time we got a champion that could change themselves in that same sort of drastic way. And Kayne is, you know, he's not necessarily the same exact idea, but Riot took that old concept that they had for a very long time, you know, that they had with champions like Elise, champions like Nidalee, champions like Jace. Those were all very old champions, Season 2 champions, and the fact that they were able to take that idea that they've already experimented with for a very long time and then apply it in a new and interesting way to Kayne is very cool. I mean, that is a very cool thing, that they were able to take such an old idea and provide a new spin on it, not entirely changing his abilities, you know, still having the same base abilities, but then also providing 2 separate transformations and a weird way to get to both of them. That's something that was really well done. And I think a lot of people, you know, when it comes to a lot of the hype surrounding new champions, everyone's always excited to try them out. But looking back on Kayne, now that he's been around for a while, I really appreciate what Riot was able to do with him as a champion. And I think that's very impressive from a champion design perspective. Next up here, we have Jhin. And I have actually railed on Jhin a lot lot in the past. I think Jhin is possibly the most boring AD carry to watch when it comes to competitive play. And seeing him for the entirety, I think, of the 2016 or 2017, like he has been around and just played nonstop in competitive play for a very long time during one of the recent seasons. And I kind of soured on him because of that. He was just so boring to watch because he doesn't have that same sort of visceral enjoyment that you get when you watch a Vayne 1v5 people and kite people and or Captain Jack and cleanses or Callista or something. Like there are a lot of other AD carries that are a lot more fun to watch than Jhin. So I've been kind of unnecessarily rude to him, I guess I'll say, but I still think Jhin is a very well-designed AD carry, and it's really interesting that Riot was able to change up the AD carry formula in such a drastic way. Taking the idea of AD carries, which are, all carries that just deal damage with auto attacks. That was the idea of AD carries, and that's how every AD carry before Jhin worked, I believe. Every AD carry, some of them still had spells. Corki still had spells. Corki dealt magic damage, but they still were so heavily focused around their auto attacks. But then to just suddenly say, not only are we going to limit this AD carry's auto attacks to 4, but we're also going to make him balanced and make him strong enough that he's actually played for a full year in the competitive scene. That's something that's very impressive and very cool. I mean, I love that Riot was able to so heavily, change the idea of what it means to be an AD carry without doing some sort of Mordekaiser bullshit it changed the idea of being an AD carry by making an AD carry that's not an AD carry that you can play bot lane. Jhin is a great example of a champion that I really like what Riot has done when it comes to being creative in possibly the most stale role in League. Next up, I have to mention Azir here because Azir is an example of a champion that is perfect. I think Azir, his gameplay is garbage. His gameplay is always overpowered or it's always underpowered or something. I don't know how Riot's going to fix his gameplay, but I love the idea of him. He maybe has one of the better lores. He has maybe one of the better lores, more interesting, ideas behind him. I think that way back in Season 2, Season 3, there was a point where I wanted to play Swain because I thought Swain was just a cool idea, right? To have a sort of commander that was a general or whatever his thing in the lore was. I thought Swain was a pretty cool idea. I think Azir is like Swain but turned up to 11. Azir is a very cool idea that also has cool and unusual gameplay to back him up. There are flaws with his gameplay that I have to say, he does have some pretty big flaws when it comes to his gameplay because he is not balanced at all. He is always overpowered or underpowered, one or the other, and never just seems to, fit nicely into League of Legends, but even so, I got to give him credit. He is a very cool idea. I love the idea. I love the idea of his gameplay, however unbalanced it might be. And he is just, what I hope Riot fixes him. I hope Riot finds a nice sweet spot of keeping his same ideas that he has now of his soldiers and being able to sort of be that kind of commander idea. But also, not rework him too much. Getting towards the end of our list here, I do want to give a quick shout out to Evelynn as well. Evelynn, I have to mention, Evelynn, Twitch, pretty much all the invisible champions. I think invisible champions in League of Legends are a very interesting idea. Again, sort of going along the lines of what I was talking about earlier. It's really cool in League when you see champions that have unique mechanics that are, only for them, that suddenly provided new, interesting way to change up the gameplay. Again, the thing about changing up the gameplay is when you change up the gameplay for an individual champion, you're also changing up the gameplay for every champion because, not only does this champion exist and now you have to figure out how you're going to play it when you play them, but people have to learn how to play with them when they're on their team, how to play against them when they're on the enemy team. And I think invisible champions, they're kind of toxic, if I'm being honest. They're kind of toxic. I don't really like that word, but they always provide a little bit of frustration because they're, it's such a hassle to even learn how to do something like ward in League. It takes such a long time for you to learn how to just ward normally. So learning how to not only ward, but also, deal with champions that can just get through wards easily. That's a bit of a toxic mechanic to have. But again, it's a new idea. It's an original idea. I pretty much love the Evelynn rework. I think Riot did a very good job on it. I also love a lot of what they've tried to do with other invisible champions like Shaco or Twitch or all the other invis champions of the game. And I gotta give them a little bit of a shout out here. Next up, I want to mention Elise and Diana here for a brief period of time. And I want to clump them together together in the same point, because the thing about both of these champions that I love so much is how even the boring champions are still really interesting and fun. Like Elise and Diana are both champions that I sort of, you look back on them and they were pretty popular back in earlier seasons, but they're kind of forgotten about nowadays. But these are still some of the really enjoyable and crazy champions that you get to, you get surprised with how fun they are for how obscure they are nowadays. Like Diana is an example of a champion that can really one-shot you. The burst that she puts out and how fun it is to put out that burst, as someone that used to play the champion a lot. How fun it is to put out that burst and the amount of burst she puts out is such an enjoyable thing to do. It's such an enjoyable thing to see. It's fun to carry with her. It's, for the most part, still, you feel like you messed up when you're playing against her. And, it's insane that this champion that she is not nearly anywhere, she is nowhere near good as a mid laner at the moment. I kind of forgot that she existed before I made this video. She is a pretty obscure champion right now, and even the fact that the obscure champions out there are still this fun is just, it's insane to think about. And the same thing can be said for Elise. With champions like Kayne now, with their enhanced transformation, and with all the modern junglers we have nowadays, I feel like, maybe my memory is failing me, but it feels like it's been a little bit of a while since Elise has been a very, super important or popular pick in competitive scenes, or in solo queue at least. Competitive players still use her, right? But, solo queue players, you don't really see Elises that often. And a lot of the time when you see an Elise, she's like the kind of jungler that your jungle feeds on with, because she messes up in the laning phase and she can't get tanky enough to survive a late game or whatever. But again, even if she is a little bit more on the obscure scale, she is very interesting with her transformation and all of her abilities and the kinds of damage she can put out and the kinds of roles that she can fulfill. She's another example of a very interesting and fun champion in League. And lastly here, I want to give a big shout out to Gangplank. Gangplank, who is so fun to play against, except when he's not. He is someone that is insanely popular, but I have to give credit. I gotta give credit where credit is due. He was possibly one of the more weird, garbage, horrible champions in before his rework came out. And, way back in the day, you guys remember, he used to be able to deny minions, Dota style, where his raise morale would only be affected when you used the cannon to, like, shoot your own minion, right? You would shoot your own minion, and that would raise morale, was the joke, I think. But, that was the old idea for Gangplank. And then you also had his, he just gave, he had a bunch of weird things. Like, he didn't really work as a champion way back in the day. He still had his Q, he still had his W, and then that raised morale, and it kind of helped his teammates and whatever, his ultimate. But, his new barrel mechanic, the way that his entire kit flows together now, the entire rework, everything. Gangplank is a perfect example of how good Riot's reworks have been in recent years. And I gotta give Riot and pretty much the entire rework team credit for that, because he turned out really well. And I think I gotta give credit. I gotta give credit where credit is due. As much as he might be frustrating to play against sometimes, and as bad as he might seem others, he is a very, very well done champion with a perfectly successful rework. I am pretty out of breath here. I don't know if you guys can tell. I am starting to get very tired because this video is turning very long, so I'll go ahead and cut it off there. There are plenty of other champions out there that I absolutely adore, and plenty more champions I could probably gush about if I knew more about them, being, if I started playing other roles beyond top lane so much. I think League of Legends has so many fun champions, and it is such a fun game that, 139 champions. I already tried to make a video talking about all of them. But that is it. In this 1.5 hour video, I think I have made my point. This game is amazing. League of Legends is amazing in so many ways. Its competitive scene is amazing. Its community can be amazing. The gameplay is insanely fun. It is such a great spectator sport. It is so well run by Riot. There are so many positives that you can list that I've tried to list just a fraction of them in this video. I hope you guys all enjoyed watching, listening. I just kind of had gameplay up here for to have something to look at. I hope you enjoyed it. This very long video, and I hope it was all worth it, because this was quite a long day making this. Anyway, though, hope you all enjoyed watching today's video. I will see you all soon. Until next time, though, thank you very much for watching. Good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.